She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to hear it. But the moment those words left the guards' mouths in Russian, low, clipped, and cold as a loaded barrel, 17-year-old Amara knew that somewhere nearby, a man was about to die. And God help her, she couldn't let it happen. The parking garage on 6th and Hanover smelled like motor oil, cold concrete, and cigarettes, the kind of place nobody lingered unless they had a reason to hide. Amara Cole had 3 reasons. 1. Her shift at the dry cleaners ended at 9, and the 42 bus didn't come until 9:30. 2. The rain outside had gone from drizzle to downpour in the span of 10 minutes, and her jacket, thin, secondhand, a burgundy bomber 2 sizes too big, was already soaked through the shoulders. 3. Mr. Ewan, the dry cleaner's owner, had docked her pay again this week, claiming a customer complained about a crease in their shirt. $40 short. Which meant she was doing the math in her head again, that grim, familiar arithmetic of which bill to delay and which one to prey on. So she sat on the concrete lip of the stairwell on level 2, backpack between her knees, earbuds in, but no music playing. Amara never played music in unfamiliar spaces. Her mother had taught her that. You keep one ear for the world, baby. The world don't announce itself. She was 16 when her mother said that. Her mother was gone by 17. And Amara, now a month past that birthday, had taken every word the woman ever said and pressed it into herself like a tattoo. Permanent. Load-bearing. She was watching the rain blur the entrance ramp when the black SUVs pulled in. Not 1. 3. They came in slow and deliberate, headlights cutting through the gray, tires barely whispering on the slick concrete. No music. No rush. The kind of arrival that understood itself to be significant. The vehicles were identical, obsidian black, windows tinted past legal, plates she couldn't read at this angle. They parked in a tight triangle formation near the far end of level 2, engines dying almost simultaneously. Amara pulled one earbud out. The doors opened. Men stepped out, 4 from each vehicle, 12 total, and they moved the way people move when they've spent years learning how not to be seen noticing things. Suits. Earpieces. The particular stillness of trained bodies. 2 of them did a slow perimeter sweep, eyes scanning the garage the way Amara had seen security do at the downtown mall, except these men's eyes didn't carry the boredom of minimum wage. They carried something sharper. Then the middle SUV's rear door opened, and a different kind of man stepped out. He wasn't the tallest. He wasn't the broadest. But the 12 men around him rearranged themselves the moment his feet touched concrete, the way iron filings orient to a magnet, subtle, instant, complete. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, silver cufflinks catching the garage's fluorescent flicker. His hair was dark, shot through with gray at the temples, cut close. His face was angular, composed, unreadable in the way of men who have learned that expression is a weapon best kept holstered. Korean. Late 50s. And the kind of quiet that precedes thunder. Amara had grown up in the Crescent Hill neighborhood, 7 blocks from where 2 of the city's most territorial crews had spent 3 years disagreeing loudly and fatally about a 4-block radius. She knew, at a molecular level, the difference between men who carried violence as a profession and men who performed it as theater. This man was the former. She should have looked away. Should have tucked herself smaller into the stairwell, ridden out the 9:30 bus and studied invisibility, gotten home, eaten whatever was left in the cabinet, slept. She almost did. But then the 2 guards nearest her position, the ones running the perimeter, who had looped back toward the stairwell without seeming to notice her tucked in the shadow of the door, stopped. One of them spoke. Low. Quick. In Russian. Amara's whole body went still. She didn't speak Russian. Hadn't studied it, hadn't grown up around it, had heard it maybe a handful of times in movies or on the train when tourists came through. But you don't need to know a language to understand tone. And the tone of what passed between those 2 men in the next 30 seconds was not the tone of guards doing routine work. It was the tone of a plan. One of them, heavy-set, blonde stubble, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, glanced toward the entrance ramp. The other, leaner, younger, something restless in his jaw, touched his earpiece and said something with a word at the end that Amara's mind snagged on like a thread on a nail. Mashina. She didn't know the word. But the lean guard's eyes had cut, just for a second, the briefest flash, toward a specific car. Not the three black SUVs. A fourth vehicle. Dark blue. Parked alone against the far wall. A car that hadn't been there when the SUVs arrived. A car she hadn't noticed because it was parked in the one blind spot of the garage's overhead light, sitting in a pocket of deliberate darkness. Waiting. Amara's pulse jumped. Her hands, resting on her backpack straps, went cold. The two guards finished their exchange and continued their sweep, moving away from her, their steps unhurried, professional. If they had seen her, they gave no sign. Which meant either she was invisible to them, or she was already factored in as irrelevant. She needed her to be irrelevant. She needed her brain to say, not your problem. Not your world. Get on the bus, Amara. But her mother's voice was in her ear instead, quiet and firm as always, you keep one ear for the world, baby. And her eyes were on the Korean man in the charcoal suit, who was now walking, unhurried, flanked, toward the stairwell on the opposite end of level 2. Toward the side of the garage that would take him directly past that blue car. Amara stood up. Her legs moved before her mind had finished the argument about why they shouldn't. She stepped out of the stairwell shadow, backpack clutched to her chest, and looked across the long gray expanse of the parking garage at 12 armed men and one very powerful stranger. And she started to walk toward them. If you're already hooked, drop a comment and tell me, would you have walked toward those men? Let's see what you're made of. 12 pairs of eyes found her before she'd taken 10 steps. She felt them land on her the way you feel a temperature drop, sudden, full body, impossible to ignore. The perimeter guard stiffened. 2 of them shifted their weight in that practiced, barely visible way that meant hands were moving closer to things beneath their jackets. One of them, broad-shouldered, with a neck like a concrete pillar, stepped forward and raised a palm. Stop. His accent was thick. Eastern European. Not Russian, or maybe Russian, she couldn't be sure. But the palm was universal. Amara stopped. 11 feet away. Close enough to be heard. Far enough, she hoped, to not be immediately grabbed. I need to talk to him. She nodded toward the Korean man, who had paused in his stride and was now watching her with the particular stillness of someone who has survived long enough to be curious about unexpected things. The big guard didn't move. You need to leave. I know. She swallowed. Her mouth was dry in a way that had nothing to do with thirst. I will. I need 30 seconds. Please. Leave. Now. There's a car. The words came out before she could second-guess them. Blue. Parked against the far wall. Your guys, 2 of them, they were talking about it. I don't speak Russian but I know what it looks like when someone's got a plan that isn't on the schedule. Silence fell over the garage like something physical. The big guard's expression didn't change. But something shifted in his posture, a tightening, an alertness that hadn't been there a moment ago. Behind him, she saw 2 of the other suited men exchange a glance that lasted less than a second but contained an entire conversation. And then the Korean man spoke. Let her through. His voice was low, even, and carried the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. It was the voice of someone who has never once in his adult life needed to repeat himself. The big guard stepped aside, not happily, but immediately, and Amara walked forward on legs she was actively willing to stay steady. Up close, the Korean man was older than he'd appeared from across the garage. 60, maybe. The gray at his temples was more silver than she'd realized, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes, not soft ones, not laugh lines, but the kind carved by years of watching everything. His eyes were dark and extraordinarily still. They moved over her the way a scanner moves over a document, thorough, precise, missing nothing. He looked at her burgundy bomber jacket. Her backpack. Her soaked sneakers. The way she was holding herself, spine straight, chin level, hands visible, doing every unconscious thing she'd learned to do around men who made the air feel dangerous. Something in his face, not quite softening, but shifting. A recalibration. You're a child, he said. It wasn't an insult. It was almost quieter than that. Almost something like concern. I'm 17, Amara said. And 2 of your guards were speaking Russian on the south perimeter. One of them looked at a blue car parked in a blind spot near the west wall. Deliberately. The way you look at something you've already decided about. A beat of silence. Show me, he said. She turned and pointed. And when two of his men moved immediately, not jogging, but moving with that coiled, purposeful speed, toward the west wall, Amara felt her heart hammering so hard she was sure the man beside her could hear it. It took 40 seconds. 40 seconds during which nobody in the garage spoke. During which Amara stood with 12 armed men and their boss in a concrete box underground in the rain, thinking about the 42 bus and her mother and the $40 Mr. Ewan had stolen from her paycheck and how none of it felt real anymore. Then one of the men who'd gone to check the blue car raised a hand, 3 fingers, and something passed through the assembled group like a current. 3. Whatever 3 meant in their language, it made the big guard's jaw go tight and made the Korean man close his eyes for one precise, controlled second. He opened them and looked at Amara. You heard them, he said. It wasn't a question. I told you I did. And you came to tell me. Still not a question. More like he was turning the fact over, examining it. Why? Amara thought about lying. Thought about something useful sounding, something that made her seem strategic or brave in a clean, uncomplicated way. But her mother hadn't raised her to dress things up. Because I've seen what happens, she said, when people know something bad is coming and don't say anything. The man was quiet for a long moment. And then, with a deliberateness that felt like a decision being made in real time, he said. What's your name? Amara. Amara. He repeated it like he was storing it somewhere precise. I am Park Sung-jin. And you have just done something that very few people in this city have ever done for me. What's that? His eyes held hers without flinching. Told me the truth. They didn't let her leave. Not in a threatening way, no one grabbed her arm or blocked her path explicitly. But when she edged toward the stairwell and mentioned the bus, Park Sung-jin simply said, not yet, in the same tone he'd used for everything else, and the big guard materialized at a polite but immovable distance from the exit. The message was clear, she was a variable that needed to be resolved before anyone moved. Amara sat on the hood of one of the black SUVs, she'd been guided there by a younger guard with a surprisingly apologetic expression, who'd offered her a bottle of water she'd accepted because her hands needed something to hold, and watched the next 20 minutes unfold with the detached, hyper-aware focus of someone whose nervous system had decided fear was too expensive and had defaulted to observation instead. The blue car turned out to be more than a car. She caught fragments. Voices carrying across concrete in clipped, controlled tones. She saw cases being removed from the vehicle's trunk by Park's men, dark, flat, handled with the careful respect of things that were either very expensive or very dangerous, likely both. She saw phones being produced, calls being made in Korean too fast and idiomatic for even an educated guess at translation. She saw the 2 Russian-speaking guards, the ones she'd seen on the perimeter, being quietly, efficiently separated from the rest of the group and guided toward one of the SUVs with a gentleness that fooled nobody. The heavy-set one, blonde stubble, the scar through his eyebrow, looked at Amara when they passed her. It wasn't a threatening look, exactly. It was worse than that. It was a measuring look. The look of someone filing something away. She held his gaze until he looked away first. She didn't know why. Some deep-wired stubbornness, maybe. Her mother again, never let them see you fold, baby. You can be scared and still be standing. Park Sung-jin reappeared from behind the SUV cluster 20 minutes later. He walked toward her without hurry, like someone who'd finished a chapter and moved to the next. 2 guards flanked him at a respectful distance, close enough to act, far enough to allow the illusion of privacy. He stopped in front of her and studied her with those still, dark eyes. You work in this building? He asked. Around the corner. Dry cleaners on 6th. How long? 8 months. He nodded, barely perceptibly. You take the 42 bus home. It wasn't a question. He'd put her together quickly, jacket, backpack, the wet sneakers, the stairwell, assembled her like a file. Yes, she said. Where's home? She paused. Crescent Hill. Something moved across his face, not surprise, but recognition. That's 40 minutes from here. 45 in the rain. A silence. He was looking at her in a way she couldn't fully categorize, not with warmth, exactly, but with something that occupied a similar space. Assessment, maybe, but without the coldness that word implied. More like the way someone looks at a thing they weren't expecting and are trying to honestly decide what to do with. You could have said nothing, he said. I know. You could have gotten on the bus. Gone home. Told yourself it was none of your business. I know. Why didn't you? I already told you. Tell me again. She looked at him. The fluorescent lights above them were flickering again, that weak, institutional tremble, and somewhere outside, the rain was still hammering the city. She thought about her mother. About the night everything changed. About the neighbor who'd heard something and decided not to make the call, and how that choice rippled forward through time like a stone dropped in still water. Because inaction is a choice, she said. And I've seen who pays for it. Park Sung-jin looked at her for a long time. How old did you say you were? 17. He made a sound, not quite a laugh, but adjacent. My daughter is 19, he said, and then stopped himself as though he hadn't intended to say it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He pivoted. Who do you live with? The question landed with unexpected weight. Amara kept her face neutral. Myself. He waited. My mother passed 7 months ago, she said. I have a placement, a housing assistance thing. It's fine. It's stable. The word stable came out sounding exactly like what it was, a word she'd chosen to replace several words she didn't want to say in a parking garage in front of a stranger. Park Sung-jin heard all of them anyway. She could see it. He was too sharp not to. The way his gaze moved briefly, involuntarily, to the secondhand jacket. To the backpack that had to contain everything she needed because she'd learned not to leave important things somewhere she might not get back to. To the way she'd said placement and fine and stable in the flat, practiced tone of someone who'd had to say those words to officials enough times that they'd lost the ability to make her flinch. He looked away from her. Out toward the garage entrance where the rain was a silver curtain. You should eat, he said. Before the bus. She blinked. What? There's a restaurant 2 blocks from here. Han's Kitchen. I own it. He said it the same way someone else might say I have a coupon. Plainly, without pageantry. Tell them Sung-jin sent you. Order what you want. I'm not, she stopped. Started again. I don't need charity. It's not charity. His voice didn't shift at all. It's a debt being paid. There's a difference. You'll learn to accept the latter. He paused. I hope you never need the former. Amara looked at him. Looked at the card he'd produced from somewhere inside his jacket, matte black, no logo visible from this angle, just a phone number, and was now holding out to her. The number on the back, he said. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the bus doesn't come. He held her gaze. Or for any other reason. She took it. The card stock was thick between her fingers. Heavier than it looked. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, that same slight, precise nod, and turned to leave. Then he stopped. Turned back. And for the first time, there was something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Something that went past composed and past calculating and landed somewhere unguarded. Your mother raised someone worth raising, he said. Amara's throat closed. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded, and Park Sung-jin walked away through the garage toward the waiting SUVs, and she sat there on the hood of the car with the black card warm in her hand and the rain loud at the entrance and something in her chest that felt cracked open and lit at the same time. I need you to stop scrolling for 1 second. If Amara's courage is moving something in you right now, if you're thinking about a moment when you could have spoken up and didn't, drop it in the comments. This story is about all of us. She went to Han's Kitchen. She told herself she wouldn't. Stood at the bus stop for 6 minutes in the rain, the black card in her jacket pocket, the number on the back pressing through the fabric like a thumb. The 42 came. She watched it. She watched it pull away from the curb, watched its red taillights disappear around the corner, and then she stood there in the wet for another 30 seconds before she turned and walked 2 blocks south. Han's Kitchen was warm in the way of places that have been warm for a long time, the warmth built into the walls, into the smell of broth and sesame and something frying in the back kitchen. It was small, 10 tables, paper lanterns, the murmur of a television in the corner showing Korean news, subtitles running fast across the bottom. Half the tables were occupied. Nobody looked up when she came in. A woman behind the counter, late 40s, compact, with the air of someone who had run this kitchen since before Amara was born, glanced up and raised an eyebrow. "Sung-jin sent me," Amara said. The woman's eyebrow returned to neutral. She came around the counter, guided Amara to a corner table without ceremony, and put a menu in front of her and a cup of barley tea beside it without being asked. Then she went back to the kitchen. Amara sat. She held the warm cup in both hands and looked at the menu for a while without reading it. She was thinking about the look on the blonde guard's face when he'd passed her. The way he'd measured her. Filed her away. She was thinking about the black card in her pocket. She was thinking about the fact that she had just walked into the center of something she didn't have the maps for, something that operated by rules she didn't know, in a world with consequences that didn't forgive ignorance. She'd done the right thing. She believed that. But she understood, in the particular way of someone who grew up where consequences were concrete and immediate, that doing the right thing and being safe afterward were two different propositions. The food came. She hadn't been asked what she wanted. The woman from the counter simply brought it, a clay pot of soft tofu stew, steaming in red orange, a bowl of rice, something pickled and cool on the side, and set it down in front of her like it was obvious. Like feeding Amara was a thing that had already been decided. Amara stared at it. Her eyes burned. She blinked. She was not going to cry in a restaurant over soup. She was not. She ate. She was halfway through the stew, feeling something in her chest slowly, a knot that had been knotted for so long she'd stopped registering the tension, when the door opened and Park Sung-jin walked in. He was alone. No guards, or rather, she spotted one stationed outside the window, another at the entrance she hadn't noticed when she came in. But at the table level, just him. He'd traded the charcoal suit jacket for something darker. He looked, in this light, more like someone's father. He stopped when he saw her and looked, very briefly, like he'd intended to be somewhere else and had come here without fully deciding to. Then he came and sat across from her. She waited. "I made some calls," he said. "About me?" "Yes." He said it without apology. Amara Cole. Crescent Hill Placement Housing, 7th floor. Previously under the guardianship of her mother, Denise Cole, who passed from cardiac arrest 7 months ago. Before that, he paused. Before that, from what I understand, you were at the top of your class at Henderson High. The stew in her stomach had gone still. You didn't need to do that. No, he agreed. But I did it. He looked at her steadily. You're registered at Henderson but you haven't been attending. Your placement worker has flagged it. You're at risk of losing the housing assistance if your enrollment drops below threshold. Amara set her spoon down carefully. I know. Do you want to tell me why? Not particularly. He waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting, the kind of waiting that wasn't passive, that was its own kind of pressure. She looked at the table. I lost the bus pass. Couldn't pay for a new one. Couldn't walk 9 miles round trip and do an 8-hour shift and, she stopped. It doesn't matter. I'm fixing it. How much is the bus pass? She looked up at him. That's not why I'm telling you. I know it isn't. How much? $32. He said nothing. Reached into his jacket pocket and removed something and placed it flat on the table between them. Not a card this time. A folded square of bills. She stared at it. That's not. 6 months of bus passes, he said. Approximately. And a conversation you should have with the woman at the counter before you leave, because she needs someone 3 afternoons a week who she can trust. The position comes with pay and a meal. He paused. The meal is non-negotiable. I understand that might be a problem for someone who doesn't accept charity. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Park Sung-jin was quiet. Outside, the rain had softened to something gentler. The television in the corner murmured. The kitchen sounds wrapped around them. My daughter, he said, and then was quiet again in a way that said the sentence had more behind it than he was releasing. She was your age when I was, elsewhere. When the work I did was more consuming than anything else. He looked at the table. She grew up without me present in the ways that mattered. We are. He chose carefully. We are working on that. Still. He looked at Amara. And she understood, with the clarity that sometimes comes in warm rooms after fear has passed, that she wasn't just a debt being paid. That she was something he was practicing on. Practicing for. I couldn't give her this, he said quietly. But I can give it to you. And perhaps that makes me better at giving it to her. He paused. I understand this logic may not hold perfectly. It holds, Amara said. Her voice was rough at the edges. It holds. He nodded once. Stood. Straightened his jacket. Eat the rest of your stew, he said. And go back to school, Amara. He walked toward the door. And then he stopped, the second time he'd stopped, and turned back. You said inaction is a choice, he said. And that you've seen who pays for it. Yes. So have I. His voice was very even. I paid it for many years. I'm trying to stop. He looked at her with those still, dark eyes. I'm glad you didn't get on that bus. He left. Amara sat in the warm kitchen with the money on the table and the soup in the bowl and something in her chest that had been cracked open earlier now filling slowly, carefully, with something that felt like the early stages of okay. She went back to school on Monday. She sat in the back of her AP literature class and listened to her teacher read Langston Hughes, What Happens to a Dream Deferred. And for the first time in 7 months, she wasn't calculating the cost of the bus ride home or whether the lights in her unit would still be on when she got there. She was just listening. Just learning. Like she was supposed to be. The work at Han's kitchen started that Wednesday. 3 afternoons a week, 4 to 8, doing what the woman at the counter, whose name turned out to be Mrs. Han herself, needed done, prep work, taking orders when the dinner rush hit, restocking, keeping the back counter clean. The work was uncomplicated. The meal at the end of each shift was not, it was always too much food, always served without comment, always waiting like it was obvious. After 3 weeks, Mrs. Han started teaching her phrases. Korean ones. Little things, how to greet a customer, how to ask if someone needed water, how to say thank you correctly, 감사합니다, with the register of genuine meaning rather than reflex. Amara practiced on the walk home. Said the words to the night air, let them sit in her mouth, learned their shapes. She thought about her mother, who had believed that the best thing a person could do was learn how other people understood the world. That every language was a room you could choose to walk into. She thought about the black card in her jacket pocket. She hadn't needed to use it. She hoped she never would. But she carried it the way she carried her mother's voice, with the understanding that its value was not in the having but in the knowing. The 2 Russian-speaking guards from the garage, she never found out exactly what happened. She didn't ask and no one told her. She understood this was intentional and was fine with it. She understood that she existed at the edge of Park Sung-jin's world, not inside it, and that this was a careful, deliberate kindness on his part. He was letting her benefit from his orbit without pulling her into its gravity. She recognized the distinction because her mother had made it once, talking about a neighbor. Real protection doesn't require you to need it forever. Real protection helps you build walls of your own. She saw Park Sung-jin 4 times after the garage. Once, he came to Han's kitchen on a Thursday evening and sat at the corner table alone and ordered soup and read something on his phone, and she refilled his water twice and he said 감사합니다 to her in Korean when she did, and she said it back, and the side of his mouth moved in something small and real. Once, she came into the restaurant to find a package at Mrs. Han's counter with her name on it, a transit card, loaded, and a new jacket. Warmer than the burgundy bomber. Deep green. Her size exactly. No note. She stood holding it for a long moment before she put it on. Once, she passed a black SUV outside Henderson High, idling, patient, and through the gap in the window tint she caught the silhouette of someone watching the school's entrance. She understood he was checking on her. She understood this was something he needed more than she did. She kept walking. And once, the last time, she was coming out of her end-of-term exams, transcript in hand, 3 credits ahead of where she'd been in September, future feeling for the first time like a direction rather than a wall, when she found Park Sung-jin standing outside the school gates. Alone. Hands in his jacket. Looking at her the way she'd come to recognize, that quiet, thorough attention he gave to things he was trying to understand. You passed, he said. She smiled. You hacked my school records. I made inquiries. A pause. You passed with distinction. I know. She couldn't stop the smile. She'd looked at that transcript so many times in the last hour that the paper had gone soft at the fold. My mom would've. She stopped. Park Sung-jin waited. He was very good at that. She would have been here, Amara said quietly. She would have embarrassed me. Made too much noise. Cried and then told me not to tell anyone she cried. He nodded. Something moved through his face, quick, genuine, dawn before it could be catalogued. She sounds, he said, like someone worth being embarrassed by. Amara laughed. She hadn't expected to, and it came out warm and real and a little broken at the edges, which was fine. Things could be both. Yeah, she said. She was. They stood there in the thinning afternoon light outside Henderson High, two people from different worlds that had collided in a parking garage one rainy evening and decided, against all logic and probability, to take the impact seriously. There was no grand announcement. No ceremony. No resolution that tied everything in clean bows, because life didn't do that, and they both knew it, and neither of them was inclined to pretend. But there was this, a girl holding a transcript that meant she had a future. A man who had spent 30 years building walls finally trying to build doors. A dead woman's voice in the air between them, patient and warm as always. And the understanding, quiet, solid, unspoken, that what had happened in that garage was not an ending or a beginning but a pivot. The moment before a new direction. Amara had heard something. She had chosen not to be silent. And the world, her world, had shifted in return. Mrs. Han, Park Sung-jin said, has asked if you consider continuing in the fall. I was going to ask about that. She adjusted the strap of her backpack. And I've been thinking. If you'd consider it. Some kind of formal arrangement. Something I'm earning rather than receiving. He looked at her. The side of his mouth moved again, that small, real thing. I will consider it, he said. She nodded. He nodded. The afternoon held them for a moment, unhurried. Then Amara Cole tucked her transcript under her arm, said Gamsahamnida in the correct register, and walked toward the bus stop with her future in her hands and her mother's voice in her ear and a green jacket keeping the cold at the edges where it belonged. And Park Sung-jin watched her go, his hands in his jacket pockets, thinking about his daughter, thinking about rooms with open doors, thinking about a 17-year-old girl who had walked toward 12 armed men in a parking garage because she understood, better than most people 3 times her age, that silence is never neutral. That it always lands somewhere. That someone always pays. He turned and walked to his car. On the seat inside was his phone, and on the screen was a message thread to a contact labeled simply, Minji. His daughter. Unanswered, on his end, for 11 days. He picked up the phone. He started to type. If this story hit you somewhere real, if Amara's courage, or Park's quiet redemption, or that mother's voice running through everything made you feel something, please, don't scroll past. Leave a comment. Tell me who you saw in this story. Because I think you saw someone. And I think they deserve to be named. Drop it below. I read every single one.